The dust swirled around the buckboard wagon, caking everything in a fine, gritty layer. Martha, a slight woman of 20, stepped down onto the parched earth, her single worn valise clutched in her hand. Her dress, though clean, was simple, hinting at a life of hardship. She had traveled days, sent by a distant relative to this remote homestead, a place she knew only by name, and a curt, impersonal letter. A man emerged from the cabin, his frame gaunt, his eyes as hard as the flint he sometimes used to spark a fire. This was Elias. His face was a mask of perpetual disapproval, etched with the bitterness of a failed ranch, a life that hadn't gone his way. He eyed Martha up and down, a sneer twisting his lips. "So, you're the help?" Elias grunted, his voice rasping like sandpaper. "Small and quiet, just like the letter said. Reckon you won't be much good." He spit a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt near her worn boots. "Honestly, you look worthless. Another mouth to feed, probably." Martha flinched, but she didn't speak. She just tightened her grip on her valise, her gaze steady, though a flicker of pain crossed her eyes. She had been called many things in her life, but worthless on the very day of her arrival by the man who was now her reluctant guardian felt like a brand. Elias turned, disappearing back into the cabin, leaving Martha standing alone in the swirling dust, the sun beating down, the weight of his words pressing on her. Life on Elias's homestead was a grueling test. From dawn till dusk, Martha worked. She hauled water from the distant well, her shoulders aching. She tended the meager garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. She cooked plain, often tasteless meals over a sputtering fire. Elias rarely spoke, and when he did, it was to bark orders or offer cutting remarks about her slowness, her supposed ineptitude. He watched her constantly, his gaze always critical. She was a silent shadow, tirelessly working, enduring his harshness without a single complaint. Despite his words, Martha showed no resentment. She simply worked, meticulously, diligently. When a calf was born weak, she sat with it through the night, hand-feeding it, until it gained strength. When a pipe burst in the freezing winter, she was the one who tirelessly repaired it, her fingers numb with cold. She noticed the small details Elias missed, the sag in the barn roof, the loose stone in the well, the way the wild rye choked out the sparse corn. Elias observed her, his brow perpetually furrowed. He never offered praise, never softened his tone. Yet he noticed the small improvements around the homestead. The cabin became cleaner, more orderly. The food, though simple, was now nourishing. The garden, against all odds, seemed to yield more. He couldn't deny the changes, though he would never admit they were because of her. Years passed. Martha grew stronger, her frame lean but resilient. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused, but her eyes held a quiet light, a deep, unwavering resolve. She had taken Elias's broken, neglected homestead and, through sheer will and tireless effort, transformed it. The barn stood sturdy. The fences were mended. The garden flourished, providing enough for them to trade in town. Her reputation for quiet competence spread, far surpassing Elias's own. He still barked orders, but the edge of bitterness in his voice seemed to thin. He still watched her, but his gaze now held a flicker of something he couldn't name. Perhaps grudging respect, perhaps confusion. He was a man steeped in his own disappointment, incapable of expressing anything but his long-held grievances. Then came the year of the drought. The sun scorched the earth, the well began to dry, and the corn withered to brittle stalks. Despair settled over the valley, threatening to ruin everyone, including Elias. He sat on his porch, a broken man, watching his life's work turn to dust. He was losing everything. Martha, however, didn't despair. She had spent years observing the land, learning its secrets. She remembered the old-timers' tales of a hidden spring, far up in the rocky hills, a trickling source only known to a few. She had quietly explored, mapped it in her mind. Without a word, she began to dig. Day after day, under the merciless sun, she worked, digging a trench, a narrow, winding channel from the distant spring down to their parched fields. Elias watched her, disbelief warring with a flicker of desperate hope. He saw her hands blister, her body ache, but she never stopped. It took weeks. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat, her movements driven by a relentless purpose. Finally, on a blistering afternoon, a small trickle of water appeared at the end of the trench, flowing into their dry fields. A tiny, miraculous stream. Elias walked out to the field, his steps heavy. He knelt by the water, watching it soak into the cracked earth. A life-giver. He looked up at Martha, who stood, exhausted but resolute, against the setting sun. He saw the incredible strength, the unwavering spirit, the quiet brilliance he had called worthless. He saw not a woman who took, but a woman who created, who saved. The dam of bitterness within him broke. His shoulders shook. He tried to speak, but no words came, only a ragged sob. Tears, hot and raw, streamed down his weathered cheeks. He, Elias, the man who called her worthless, wept openly, deeply, for the first time in decades. He wept for the land, for the life she had brought back, and for his own blindness. He wept for the woman who had arrived as nothing in his eyes, and had built a life, a future, that had made him weep with a profound, overwhelming mixture of regret, awe, and desperate gratitude. He had called her worthless, but she had built a life and a legacy that had saved them both.